What would you do if your own mother publicly humiliated you at your graduation party, telling everyone you're adopted just because you achieved something she never could? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. And what I discovered next about my real family will shock you just as much as it shocked me. My name is Sophia, and I never imagined that achieving my dreams would become the reason my own mother would try to destroy me in front of everyone I cared about. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because this story is about so much more than just one humiliating moment at a graduation party. Growing up in our small town in Ohio, I was always what you'd call the overachiever. While other kids were playing video games or hanging out at the mall, I was buried in books, working on science projects, or volunteering at the local animal shelter. My report cards were filled with A's, and I collected academic awards like other kids collected Pokemon cards. You'd think any parent would be thrilled, right? Well, not my mom, Janet. Janet worked as a cashier at the local grocery store and had been doing the same job for 15 years. She never finished college, dropping out after her first semester to get married to my dad, who left when I was 8. From as far back as I can remember, whenever I brought home good grades or won some academic competition, her reaction was always the same, a tight smile that never reached her eyes and a comment like, "Well, aren't you special?" in a tone that made it clear she didn't mean it as a compliment. I remember when I was 14 and won the state science fair with my project on renewable energy. I was so excited, practically bouncing off the walls when I got home. I rushed into the kitchen where Janet was making dinner and showed her the trophy. She glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds, then turned back to stirring her pasta sauce. "That's nice, Sophia," she said flatly. "Now set the table. Dinner's almost ready." That was it. No congratulations, no celebration, nothing. I went to my room that night wondering why my biggest achievements felt like such small moments in our house. The pattern continued through high school. When I became valedictorian, she complained about having to take time off work for the ceremony. When I got into Harvard with a full scholarship, something that should have been celebrated as a miracle for our family's financial situation, she just shrugged and said, "I guess you won't be around to help with groceries anymore." It was like my success was somehow an inconvenience to her, or worse, a personal insult. But I pushed through, thinking that maybe once I graduated from college, once I really made something of myself, she'd finally be proud. I threw myself into my studies at Harvard, majoring in biomedical engineering because I wanted to develop medical devices that could help people. I worked part-time jobs to pay for my personal expenses, maintained a 3.9 GPA, and even did research that got published in a scientific journal. I was living what most people would consider the American dream, a small-town girl making it big through hard work and determination. When graduation day came, I was bursting with pride, not just for myself, but because I thought this moment would finally bridge the gap between my mom and me. I had made it. I was the first person in our family to graduate from college, and not just any college, Harvard. Surely this would be enough to make her see me differently. The graduation ceremony itself was beautiful. As I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, I looked out into the crowd and saw Janet sitting there in her best dress, a navy blue one she'd worn to church for the past 5 years. She was clapping, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like pride in her eyes. Maybe things were finally going to change between us. My friends back home were so excited for me that they organized a surprise graduation party at the community center. It wasn't anything fancy, just some decorations, homemade food, and a cake that said, "Congratulations, Sophia," in purple frosting. But it meant everything to me. All my old teachers were there, neighbors who had watched me grow up, family, friends, and even some of my professors who had driven down from Boston. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by people who were genuinely happy for my success. The party was going perfectly. Mrs. Rodriguez, my old chemistry teacher, was telling everyone about how she knew I'd be special from the day I corrected the textbook in 9th grade. Mr. Peterson from next door was bragging to anyone who'd listen about our neighborhood genius. I was glowing with happiness, finally feeling like all those years of hard work and feeling misunderstood at home had been worth it. That's when everything went wrong. Janet had been drinking wine, more than usual, and I noticed she was getting that particular look in her eyes that I'd learned to recognize over the years. It was the same look she got whenever someone complimented me in front of her, like she was swallowing something bitter. But I was so caught up in the celebration that I didn't pay enough attention to the warning signs. About an hour into the party, Janet suddenly stood up and clinked her wine glass with a fork, calling for everyone's attention. The room gradually quieted down, with everyone turning to look at her expectantly. I remember feeling a flutter of hope in my chest, thinking maybe she was finally going to give one of those proud mom speeches I'd seen in movies. Maybe she was going to tell everyone how hard I'd worked, how proud she was, how I'd overcome the odds. Instead, she took a long sip of her wine, looked directly at me with those cold eyes I knew so well, and said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "You know what? I think it's time everyone knew the real truth about Sophia." The room went completely silent. I could feel my heart starting to race, but I had no idea what was coming next. "She's not actually my daughter," Janet continued, her words slurring slightly. "She's adopted. I took her in when she was a baby, and honestly, I should have told everyone years ago. It explains so much, doesn't it? Why she's so different from the rest of our family. Why she's so ambitious, so driven to prove herself all the time. Real daughters don't make their mothers feel like failures just by existing." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as the entire room stared at me in shocked silence. Some people were looking at Janet like she'd lost her mind. Others were looking at me with pity, and I could see a few people whispering to each other behind their hands. The happy celebration atmosphere vanished instantly, replaced by the most awkward, uncomfortable silence I'd ever experienced. I stood there frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Adopted? How could I be adopted and not know it? And why would she choose this moment, this perfect moment that I'd worked so hard for, to drop this bombshell? The worst part wasn't even the adoption revelation, it was the way she said it. Like my success was somehow proof that I didn't really belong to her. Like being ambitious was a character flaw that proved I wasn't really her child. The silence in that community center felt like it lasted forever, but it was probably only about 30 seconds before people started shifting uncomfortably and whispering among themselves. I could hear fragments of conversations. Did she really just say that? And poor Sophia, and what kind of mother does that? But all I could focus on was Janet's face, which showed absolutely no remorse for what she'd just done. If anything, she looked almost satisfied, like she'd finally gotten something off her chest that had been bothering her for years. Mrs. Rodriguez was the first person to break the awful silence. She walked over to me and put her arm around my shoulders, shooting Janet a look that could have frozen fire. "Honey," she said softly, "maybe you should step outside for some fresh air." I nodded numbly, letting her guide me toward the door, while behind us I could hear people starting to talk in hushed, urgent tones. As we walked past Janet, she didn't even look at me. She just took another sip of her wine like she'd just commented on the weather. Outside, the cool evening air hit my face, and that's when the shock finally wore off and the emotions came flooding in. I wasn't crying exactly, but I was shaking all over, and I couldn't seem to catch my breath properly. Mrs. Rodriguez sat me down on the steps of the community center and just stayed with me while I tried to process what had just happened. My entire life, everything I thought I knew about myself, had just been turned upside down in front of 50 people. "She's lying," I finally managed to say. "She has to be lying. Why would she wait until now to tell me something like that? And why in front of everyone?" But even as I said it, pieces were starting to click into place in my mind. I'd always wondered why I looked so different from Janet. She was short and stocky, with brown hair and brown eyes, while I was tall and slim with blonde hair and green eyes. She always just said I looked like my dad, but now that I thought about it, I'd never seen any baby pictures of myself. Every photo Janet had of me started when I was around 2 years old. Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed my hand. "Sweetheart, even if what she said is true, the way she told you was completely wrong. You didn't deserve that. especially not tonight of all nights." She paused for a moment, looking back toward the community center where we could hear people, still talking. "You know what? Let me drive you home. You don't need to go back in there right now." But I knew I couldn't just go home and pretend this hadn't happened. I needed answers, and I needed them now. "No," I said, standing up and straightening my dress. "I'm going back in there. If she's going to drop a bomb like that on my graduation day, she's going to explain herself." When I walked back into the community center, the party was essentially over. Most people were awkwardly gathering their things and making excuses about why they needed to leave early. A few of my closest family friends came over to give me hugs and whisper things like, "We're here for you if you need anything." But I could see the pity in their eyes, and it made my stomach turn. This was supposed to be the best day of my life, and Janet had turned it into a nightmare. I found her at the refreshment table, casually eating a piece of my graduation cake like nothing had happened. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Right now." She looked up at me with those cold eyes. "What's there to talk about?" I told the truth. "Isn't that what you're always going on about? Being honest and authentic and all that college nonsense?" "The truth?" I felt my voice getting louder, and I didn't care who heard me at this point. "You wait 22 years to tell me I'm adopted, and you do it in front of half the town at my graduation party? What is wrong with you?" Janet set down her fork and crossed her arms. "You want to know what's wrong with me, Sophia? I'm tired. I'm tired of watching you act like you're better than everyone in this family. I'm tired of people asking me why. I never went to college like my smart daughter. I'm tired of feeling like a failure every time you succeed at something." Her voice was getting louder, too, and the few remaining party guests were definitely listening now. At least now people understand why you're so different, why you never fit in with the rest of us. The cruelty in her words hit me harder than the adoption revelation had. This wasn't just about a family secret. This was about years and years of resentment that I'd never fully understood. She wasn't proud of me. She was jealous of me. My achievements didn't make her happy. They made her feel inadequate. And instead of dealing with her own feelings like an adult, she'd decided to destroy the happiest moment of my life. "So you're saying that being adopted makes me ambitious? That it explains why I worked hard in school?" I could hear my voice breaking, but I couldn't stop myself. "Or are you saying that because I'm not really your daughter, I don't deserve to be celebrated? That my success somehow doesn't count?" "I'm saying," Janet replied, her words sharp and precise, "that maybe if people knew the truth, they'd stop comparing me to you all the time. Maybe they'd understand that your success has nothing to do with how I raised you." That's when I realized the full scope of what she'd done. This wasn't just about embarrassing me. It was about protecting her own ego. By telling everyone I was adopted, she was essentially disowning all the hard work, all the sacrifices, all the years of supporting me through school. She wanted to make it clear that my achievements were mine alone, not something she could take any credit for. But in doing so, she was also making it clear that she'd never really considered me her real daughter at all. Mr. Peterson, who had been hovering nearby, obviously listening to our conversation, finally stepped in. "Janet, maybe you should go home and sleep this off. You're going to regret saying these things tomorrow." But Janet just laughed bitterly. "The only thing I regret is not saying it sooner. Do you know what it's like having everyone in town constantly telling you how lucky you are to have such a smart, successful daughter when she's not even really yours? When every conversation turns into people asking why I didn't push myself the way she did, why I didn't make more of my life?" She looked directly at me. "Well, now they know. Your success story isn't my story. It never was." I felt like I was going to be sick. Everything I had believed about my life, about my family, about my identity, was crumbling around me. But worse than that was the realization that the woman who had raised me had been harboring this level of resentment toward me for years, maybe even decades. How many times had she smiled and said she was proud of me while secretly feeling like my achievements were a personal attack on her choices? "Fine," I said. my voice barely above a whisper. If that's how you really feel, then I guess there's nothing left to say. I turned to leave, but then something made me turn back around. But you should know that being adopted doesn't change the fact that I love you, or that I thought you loved me too. I guess I was wrong about that. Janet's face flickered for just a moment, like maybe she realized she'd gone too far, but then her expression hardened again. Love doesn't change facts, Sophia. And the fact is, you were never really mine to begin with. Those words followed me as I walked out of that community center for the second time that night. But this time, I wasn't just leaving a ruined party. I was leaving behind everything I thought I knew about my family, my identity, and my place in the world. The little girl who had spent years trying to make her mother proud was gone, replaced by a young woman who had just learned that her entire life had been built on a lie. As I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching the last few people leave the party, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Janet's cruelty and jealousy destroy me. If I really was adopted, then I was going to find out the truth, the real truth, not the bitter, resentful version Janet had just served up to hurt me. I was going to find out where I came from, who my real parents were, and why I'd ended up with a woman who saw my success as her failure. What I would discover in the coming weeks would change everything I thought I knew about family, identity, and the power of love versus the poison of resentment. But in that moment, sitting in my car after the worst night of my life, all I knew was that I was done living in Janet's shadow, done trying to earn the love of someone who had never really seen me as her daughter anyway. The real journey was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom feeling like I was living in someone else's life. Everything looked the same. The pale yellow walls I'd painted when I was 16, my old Harvard pennant hanging above my desk, the bookshelf crammed with textbooks and novels. But nothing felt familiar anymore. It was like seeing a movie set, designed to look like my room, but knowing it was all fake. Janet had apparently stayed out late after the party because I didn't hear her come home, and her bedroom door was still closed when I got up. Part of me was relieved. I had no idea what I was supposed to say to her, or if I even wanted to say anything at all. The woman who had raised me had essentially told me I wasn't really her daughter, and that my entire personality could be explained by the fact that I didn't share her DNA. How do you have a normal conversation after something like that? I made coffee and sat at our kitchen table, the same table where I'd done homework for 12 years, where Janet and I had eaten thousands of meals together, where she'd helped me fill out my college applications. Now I was looking around wondering what else had been a lie. The few family photos on the walls showed me and Janet together at various ages, but now I was scrutinizing them with new eyes. In every single picture, there was something distant in Janet's expression when she looked at me, something I'd always attributed to her not being a naturally affectionate person. But what if it was something else entirely? I was so lost in thought that I almost jumped when my phone rang. It was my best friend from high school, Maria, who had been at the party the night before. Sophia, oh my God, are you okay? I've been awake all night thinking about what happened. That was absolutely insane. I honestly don't know if I'm okay, I admitted. I keep thinking maybe she was just drunk and made it up to hurt me. But then other things keep making sense, you know? Like why I never had any baby pictures, or why she always got weird when people said I looked nothing like her. Honey, even if it's true, what she did was unforgivable. Who announces something like that at their kid's graduation party? Maria's voice was full of the righteous anger I couldn't seem to muster for myself yet. Have you talked to her this morning? She's not even awake yet. But Maria, I think I need to find out the truth for myself. If I am adopted, I need to know everything. Where I came from, why she never told me, all of it. As I said the words, I felt something shift inside me. The shock and hurt were still there, but underneath them was something else. Determination. Do you want me to come over? We could start looking through her papers or something, see if there are any adoption documents. Maria had always been the practical one between us, the person who made action plans when everyone else was still processing emotions. Actually, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. An hour later, Maria was at my front door with a box of pastries from our favorite bakery and a look of grim determination. "Okay," she said, setting the pastries on the kitchen counter. "Where do we start? Does your mom have a home office or anywhere she keeps important documents?" I led her to the small spare room that Janet used as a combination office and storage space. It was cramped and cluttered, with filing cabinets, boxes of old tax returns, and random household items she'd never found proper places for. If there were any secrets in this house, they'd be hidden in here. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything systematically. Old utility bills, insurance papers, medical records, tax documents, but nothing about adoption. I was starting to think maybe Janet really had made it up just to hurt me when Maria called out from where she was kneeling by a bottom filing cabinet drawer. "Sophia, come look at this." She was holding a manila folder that had been wedged way in the back behind some old bank statements. The tab was labeled "Legal Documents" in Janet's handwriting, but it looked different somehow. Older, more faded than the other labels. My hands were actually shaking as I opened the folder. The first thing I saw was my birth certificate, but as I looked at it more closely, something was wrong. It listed my parents as Janet Marie Thompson and Robert James Thompson, but the paper looked new. Not like something that was 22 years old. And there was something about the printing that seemed off, like it had been done recently rather than in 2002. "That's weird," Maria said, looking over my shoulder. "Why would your birth certificate look so new? Shouldn't it be more yellowed or something?" But it was the document underneath the birth certificate that made my blood run cold. It was a letter, handwritten on expensive-looking stationery, and it was addressed to Janet. The date at the top was from July 2003, which would have made me about 1 year old. The letter read, "Dear Janet, I hope this letter finds you well. As we discussed, the arrangement we made was supposed to be temporary, just until I could get back on my feet financially and emotionally. It has now been over a year since you took Sophia, and I think it's time we talked about making this more official. I know you've grown attached to her, and she seems happy and healthy in your care, but I never intended for this to become a permanent situation. I've gotten a job now, and I have a stable place to live. I want my daughter back. Please call me so we can discuss how to handle the transition. I understand this might be difficult, but Sophia is my biological child, and I never signed away my parental rights permanently. The temporary custody arrangement we had was never meant to last this long. I hope you understand that this isn't about not trusting you or not appreciating everything you've done for her. You saved both our lives when you took her in. But she belongs with me. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sincerely, Elizabeth Hartwell." I read the letter 3 times before the words really sank in. This wasn't about adoption at all. According to this letter, I had been in some kind of temporary custody arrangement, and my biological mother had wanted me back when I was just a baby. But I'd stayed with Janet. Why? What had happened to Elizabeth Hartwell? "Oh my God, Sophia," Maria whispered. "This doesn't sound like adoption at all. This sounds like... I don't even know what this sounds like." I kept digging through the folder, and what I found next made my stomach drop to the floor. There were more letters from Elizabeth Hartwell, dated over several months. Each one became more desperate, more pleading. She talked about missing me, about having dreams where she could hear me crying for her. She mentioned getting a lawyer involved if Janet didn't respond to her letters. The last letter was dated December 2003, and it was much shorter. "Janet, since you refuse to answer my calls or letters, I have no choice but to involve the authorities. I will be contacting Child Protective Services tomorrow to report that you are unlawfully keeping my daughter from me. I never gave you legal custody, and this has gone on long enough. I will be coming to get Sophia next week, with or without your cooperation. Elizabeth." But there were no more letters after that one. No legal documents showing that Elizabeth had ever contacted CPS or tried to take me back. It was like she had just disappeared from my life completely after that final letter. "Maria," I said, my voice barely working properly. "I don't think this is about adoption at all. I think Janet took me from my real mother and just kept me. And something happened to make my biological mother stop trying to get me back. The room felt like it was spinning around me. Everything I thought I understood about my situation had just changed again. Janet hadn't adopted me through some official process. She'd apparently taken me in temporarily and then refused to give me back to my biological mother. But why? And what had happened to Elizabeth Hartwell?" Maria was staring at the letters in shock. "We need to call the police, Sophia. This is kidnapping. Even if it happened 20 years ago, this is still kidnapping." But before I could respond, I heard Janet's bedroom door open upstairs, followed by her footsteps on the stairs. We quickly shoved all the documents back into the folder, but my heart was racing so fast I was sure Janet would be able to hear it when she walked into the room. "What are you girls doing in here?" Janet's voice from the doorway made us both jump. She was wearing her old bathrobe and looked terrible. Her hair was a mess, her makeup was smeared, and her eyes were red and puffy. She obviously had a massive hangover, but there was something else in her expression too. Something that looked almost like fear. "Just looking for my old yearbooks," I lied, clutching the folder behind my back. "Maria wanted to see some pictures from high school." Janet's eyes narrowed, and she looked around the room like she was taking inventory of what we might have disturbed. "Well, you won't find yearbooks in my filing cabinets. Those are private documents." Her voice had a warning tone that I'd never heard before. "Sorry, we'll look somewhere else," I said, trying to sound casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. But as Maria and I started to leave the room, Janet stepped aside to let us pass, and I saw her eyes go directly to the filing cabinet we'd been searching through. The bottom drawer wasn't quite closed all the way. We must not have pushed it shut completely in our rush to hide the evidence. The look that crossed Janet's face in that moment was pure terror. She knew exactly what was in that filing cabinet, and she knew we'd found it. "Sophia," she said quietly, "I think we need to have a conversation." Part 4. 3 months have passed since that life-changing family dinner, and everything has transformed in ways I never could have imagined. After revealing the truth about our grandfather's hidden fortune and the real reason behind my success, my family's entire dynamic shifted overnight. My mother, Karen, was devastated when she learned that her own father had left detailed instructions in his will specifically praising my work ethic and business sense. He had written that he saw in me the same entrepreneurial spirit that built our family's original wealth, and that's why he chose me to carry on the legacy. Reading those words broke her heart, but it also opened her eyes to how wrong she had been. The family business I started with grandfather's guidance has now grown to employ 12 of my relatives, including my mother, who works as our customer service manager. She's actually incredibly good at it. And for the first time in years, I see real pride in her eyes when she talks about our work together. My cousins, who used to whisper about my mysterious success, are now asking me for business advice and genuinely celebrating every milestone we hit. My father finally found his voice too. Last week, he pulled me aside and apologized for staying silent that night at dinner. He admitted he always knew I was special, but was afraid to say anything because he didn't want to make the others feel bad. Now, he tells everyone who will listen about his brilliant daughter and how proud he is of what I've built. The most beautiful part of this whole journey is that I discovered I don't have to choose between family and success. By sharing the truth and bringing everyone into my world instead of hiding from theirs, we've all grown stronger together. My business continues to thrive, but now it's powered by genuine family support instead of lonely determination. Sometimes I think about that awful dinner and my mother's cruel words about me being adopted. In a strange way, I'm grateful it happened because it forced me to stop hiding who I really am. I learned that real family doesn't tear you down for your achievements. They lift you up and ask how they can be part of your journey. And now, finally, that's exactly what we have.